All right, welcome once again to the fire for a little fireside chat for Thursday, March 26th already. We have about a 1 week together before our break, so we are getting ready to wrap up. Talk today a little bit more theology of the body. I want to discuss some of those frequently asked questions when it comes to marriage statistics. We're going to deal with some of those things today. So just to talk a little bit about theology of the body. It's going to be given to us by John Paul II. It will become the cornerstone of the church's teaching on human sexuality and even leading into marriage. How do we use our sexuality, especially in our relationships? He's going to use this word, and he calls it concupiscence. And I sent you the notes today so you can look them over. You can follow along. I'm on the very first slide. Concupiscence is the human tendency to sin. If we look at Adam and Eve, and he's going to use the story of Adam and Eve as kind of like the cornerstone, the book of Genesis, the beginnings, using like what is our sexuality meant for? And God tells Adam and Eve to be fruitful and to multiply. Human sexuality has a purpose. It has its demands on us that we are called to create more life. And that's why we enter into the sacrament of holy matrimony, of marriage. That becomes like the center of that. The human love is what creates more life. And so concupiscence is our tendency to sin. Why do we have this tendency to sin? And it's because of selfishness. It is human ego. And we will see in the book of Genesis that it really kind of revolves around pride, which is this major issue. That we think that we can be better than God, we can be better than everyone else, and that we think that we are more important than everyone else. That's going to be probably our greatest downfall. Egocentrism, narcissism, and how do we rise above that? And it becomes about moving from utility, about what do I use people for, to how do I move outside of myself and to make a gift of self-giving. The other day we talked about the evolution of the sexual liberation, about how we've tried to kind of shape the things in our culture to allow us to get more involved in our sexuality, to give us, we call it this so-called freedom. And is it about freedom, or is it about gratification? Is it about selfishness? Is it about trying to promote my desires as I want to promote my desires? When we talk about chastity, we're going to talk about the ability for self-control, the ability for to understand what my sexuality is meant for. For my classes, from time to time, I've told this story about being this 10-year-old kid, and on our first trip, I guess I was even 9 years old, on our first trip back to see my relatives in Ireland, my grandfather had arrived here in 1915, and he left behind his brother and his entire family. And in his family, there were 5 girls, and he expected everyone to come to the United States. He demanded one thing, that everyone see the United States, decide if you want to stay, to get their citizenship, and if they did not want to stay, they could go back home. So a few stayed. I think there were 2 that stayed, and 4 went back home. And we were going to visit the farm in this beautiful spot in the hills of County Kerry, and we came to Mary's house, and her and her husband Jim were cattle farmers, and it was the time of year in which the bull was mating with the rest of the cows, and the bull was not hesitant to do what a bull does, and he was moving through the field. And as little kids, we were horrified to see what the bull was doing. And that's the instinct of an animal. And that's what, and as Jim said, the bull does what the bull does. And for us, what the humans do is that we're different. We're held to a different order. We're held to a different approach in life. We're held to, how do I think about my relationships? How do I approach my relationships in a very, very different way? And how do I consider love in every single action? That becomes important in this central theme of love, and in marriage, and in our relationships. So to think about how do we use this thought, and when we look at, we talked about lust versus love, and lust is this disordered desire, and we all we want is to fulfill our own desire, not thinking about what's important about the other person, but using that person, framing them as an object, and to use them as an object, and to use our love to what we will say is willing the good of others. If you move to the next slide, then we have an explanation exactly what is theology of the body. And here's the key. We talked about from 79 to 1984, it will be John Paul II who will use his weekly audience addresses to kind of centralize this teaching on sexuality and to make us to understand how we need to rise above this lust, how we need to rise above the utilitarianism. And he said this, that our bodies and sexual desire show us the meaning of our existence. We are called to be in communion. We are called to be with one another. It's going to demonstrate who we are and why we are here. What is our purpose? And our purpose is to give love and to give life. Those will be very, very important in this theme of love and in this theme of human sexuality. When people say, well, your desires are only natural, that is true, but they are God-given and they are here for a purpose. And we kind of break it up and we say theology. A theology is the study of God. And it's what greater way to understand God than to look at the human body. It says theology of the body is the study revealed through our bodies of understanding who he is. It's the communion of purpose that's formed in the self-giving of love of one another, in this love of the Holy Trinity with the rest of creation, in the way that God has created humans to participate in heaven, in the kingdom, and on earth. Say, when Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is at hand, it is here. We are called to be in communion. If you notice, what does Jesus constantly say? What is his real commandment? To love one another. And that really becomes very, very difficult because we're called to love one another in all circumstances, not just in the circumstances that we choose, but in the circumstances that life chooses. The total gift of self can be seen in marriage or even in celibate life. Celibate life is going to be defined as foregoing earthly marriage for eternal marriage. Foregoing the earthly marriage for the marriage with the Lamb in heaven. And when we talk about priests and nuns and we look at them religious brothers, we're going to talk about all these people as spiritually being fathers and mothers. They're going to have a lot. They're certainly spiritual fathers and mothers when they educated children. That's why they opened these schools. Was the mission of Father Chaminade. He truly was a spiritual father, trying to bring them to Christ, young people to Christ, in a place that was not Christian anymore. In France, especially during post French Revolution, it was a place where he said, I need the sons and daughters of France to come back to Christ. And that's going to be important. So he was certainly married to the Lamb in heaven, to the idea of the church, to give himself for the mission of the church. Okay, the communion of persons is all joined within each other to experience and to come to this next level. Our main goal as humans is to love. It will be St. Thomas Aquinas that's going to say this. It is the decision to will the good of another person. John Paul's vision of the body was the visible sign of the invisible God. It's a clear way to see what is God's love. God's love is shown especially through the love between a husband and wife. There are certain demands which we're going to see that are put on and expectations put on a husband and wife that are difficult. You saw the statistic. At least 50% of marriages do not survive because marriage is hard. If you know anyone in your family where there is divorce, and in my family there's plenty, it's like, how do we stay together? How do we survive this very, very difficult task? We don't judge people who are divorced. They have their own struggles in their relationship. Sometimes when the marriage was not supposed to be, when it was not really sacramental, and that could be, we look at, there will be a church tribunal that will look at a marriage and examine a marriage. There are priests that go basically just to study canon law, and what they will do is determine, if someone asks for an annulment, was there any point where we saw that this marriage was really never meant to be? It was never really sacramental. That's when the church grants an annulment. And you saw that in the frequently asked questions. It is a very, very difficult process because a lot of people look at an annulment as, well, you're just nullifying the entire relationship, you're nullifying the entire marriage, and therefore even the children are illegitimate. That is not true. It is just looking at the marriage and saying maybe the marriage was just not sacramental, and maybe there were things that stood in the way, different impediments that stood in the way that did not allow this marriage to truly succeed. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about. Love is something that has to be at the center of every relationship. He's going to use this term he's going to give us on this slide as well. A sacrament makes a spiritual reality visible. The body makes our call to love visible. And that's why we call this the sacramentality of the body. Why do we celebrate sacraments? Okay, at this point, hopefully, right, we've all had baptism. We've all had First Holy Communion. We've all had confirmation. Well, most of us had confirmation. They are going to be visible images and to remind us of the fact that we're part of the church, the fact that we're part of the body of Christ, the fact that we receive Christ in Holy Communion, the fact that we carry on Christ's mission in confirmation. They're visible images of maybe the invisible God. We celebrate sacraments to continue this, to make sure that we are going to carry on the mission. Okay, that's going to be important. How do I carry on this mission that God has sent me on? And that's why we celebrate the sacraments. Okay, that's why we're going to continue this very, very important task. Let's jump to the in vitro article, and let's just take a look for a few minutes on we want to take a look at some of the important parts of the statistics. As we mentioned, when we look at these statistics, one of the things that we're going to see is that 50% of these marriages do not last. Now, amazingly, what's happened is that statistic is even going to drop today. And the answer to that probably will not come as a surprise, is that more people have decided to not even get married. So what's happening today is a lot of people say, well, I'd rather remain under this umbrella of just living together. Oh, it's better. And here's where the danger is. First of all, that about 75% of people, it could be one person or the other, but the statistic is if they decide to get married later on, not only to each other, but to even other people, their chances of divorce are even higher. Okay, 75%. Now, what's the reason for that? It's probably because they have the escape mentality. Probably because they have this mentality of, listen, if it doesn't work, I can always go. Marriage usually does not stop that mindset, does not stop that thought. So that's one of the things that will happen when it comes to living together. Cohabitation can be very, very dangerous, especially not only for the current relationship, but for future relationships. We talk about what is the main problem when it comes to marriage. Why does marriage not succeed? And this will really come down to, and we talked about this even in junior, communication. Remember the 5 levels of communication. And, when you first meet somebody, you are just kind of, it's cliche conversation. You talk about, what is the weather? Oh, it's nice out today. I can't believe this line is so long if you're standing, waiting, especially these days, trying to get into a food store, and they're keeping you outside. Little cliche conversation, right? That's kind of how it begins. And then you start reporting facts. Then you start giving judgments, and then you start putting yourself out there, and you start saying, well, I really love this type of food. I love this team. I love this politician. And then people can judge you on that because they maybe agree, or maybe they don't agree. Then you move towards peak communication. Right? You start getting to that point where you're really putting stuff out there. And then you move to ontological communion, where you move to the point where I don't even have to speak, and this person truly knows me. Communication is ongoing. Compromise is ongoing. It becomes a very, very important part. One of the things that they talk about in here when you decide that you're going to get married, and you're going to get married in the church, one of the things that the church will ask you to do is to go to, they call it pre-Cana, or marriage encounter, this idea of going and talking about some of the things that you need to look for. One of the exercises that I thought was fascinating when I was in pre-Cana was they asked, how many children do you want? And they said, everyone close your eyes. And so people closed their eyes, and you saw, some couples with 2 and then maybe 3. And okay, that's not too bad, 1 apart. Some were exact. And there was one couple where she said she wanted 1 child, and the guy was like, I want 8 or 9. And it was like, I think you two need to have a conversation. You need to have a little chat about what you think you want for the future. Communication becomes very, very important. To talk about things, to be able to put things out there. Okay, that becomes very, very important, and you can't survive without it. So that's going to be listed as one of those things. Another contributing factor, just to keep this in mind for the future, and then this, I think I might have mentioned this before in class, but they're now saying that 10% of divorces are attributed to student debt, to student loans. So as you're trying to decide, where do I want to go to school? How much money am I going to have to take out? How many loans do I have to take? To think about, do I really, really want all this debt? Can I buy a car afterwards? Can I buy a house afterwards? How much money will I be spending every month? And how will I be able to put away money if I'm spending all this money trying to get out of my debt? Just something to keep in mind for the future. Okay, that will be really, really important. From 1960 to 1998, so we're talking about almost the span of 40 years. It says cohabitating couples increased nearly tenfold. That was then. That was just until not even the year 2000. Okay, so you had 4.2 million. By the time you got to 2008, 6.8 million. Now, if we go now another 10, 12 years, you can imagine it's probably even jumped several million. Right? People are just not really interested in taking that leap, that commitment, that making that covenant. And that covenant means everything in a relationship. Okay? It says the probability of a first marriage ending in separation or divorce within the first 5 years is 20%. But the probability of premarital cohabitation marriage breaking up within 5 years is 50%. Just think about that statistic. Right? That's really, really important. There will be people who say, what does it matter if you live together? It does matter. And there are statistics that back it up. There are things that we just need to understand, like what am I getting into? What am I getting into as I move forward? Okay? So to think about some of those things, we'll leave it for today. We're going to ask you, as we move forward, we're going to start watching this movie Fireproof, starting on Friday. Going to give you about 30-minute segments to watch on your own. It's a great movie. And what makes it great is that it brings up a lot of the points that maybe we will be experiencing in our own relationships. To think about, what are the struggles? Am I truly loving the other person as I should? We hope everyone has a great day. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to tune in. Showing up live to the conference is very, very important. We are taking attendance, and as well, just get all the homework in and to make sure that everything's in on time. Have a great day. Thanks.